April 1945, beneath the ruins of Berlin. The world that once quaked under the iron fist of Adolf Hitler's armies is crumbling. The man who once commanded vast stages across Europe, promising a thousand-year Reich, now cowers in a damp, concrete tomb beneath the shattered remains of Berlin. For over a decade, he had thrived on the myth of his own destiny, dismissing every defeat, Stalingrad, Kursk, Normandy, as a mere setback. His propaganda machine, fueled by the unwavering loyalty of ministers like Joseph Goebbels, had convinced the German people that the Führer's will was unbreakable. Yet by April 1945, that will was shattered, a fragile illusion exposed by the relentless advance of his enemies. Above ground, Berlin burns. The Red Army, a relentless tide of steel and fury, is mere miles away, their artillery shells pounding the city with a rhythm that shakes the earth. Inside the Führerbunker, a claustrophobic labyrinth 30 feet below the Reich's chancellery, there is no sunlight, only the dim flicker of dying lamps, the acrid haze of cigarette smoke, and the pervasive stench of fear. The air is thick with the weight of despair, a stark contrast to the grandiose visions Hitler once painted. Maps still cling to the walls, their surfaces marred by red arrows marking imaginary counterattacks that exist only in the Führer's fading delusions. These maps, once symbols of conquest stretching from the Atlantic to the Volga, now serve as relics of a dream turned nightmare. Hitler refuses to flee. His generals, men like General Wilhelm Keitel and Field Marshal Alfred Jodl, plead with him to escape to the Bavarian Alps, where a rumored national redoubt might offer a final stand. But Hitler laughs, a bitter, hollow sound that echoes through the bunker's concrete corridors. Surrender? Never. I will not run like a coward, he declares, his voice trembling with a mix of defiance and madness. To him, retreat is an unthinkable humiliation, a stain on the legacy he has spent years crafting. Death, he insists, is preferable to defeat. Yet behind those cold, piercing blue eyes, something has shifted. For the first time, Adolf Hitler begins to grasp the unbearable truth that his world, his empire, his control, his myth, is irrevocably lost. The cracks in the inner circle. The first crack in Hitler's facade of invincibility appears with a message from Hermann Göring, his once loyal deputy and head of the Luftwaffe. On April 23, 1945, as Soviet forces tighten their grip on Berlin, Göring sends a telegram from his lavish retreat in Berchtesgaden. Citing Hitler's isolation in the bunker, he proposes assuming command of the Reich under the 1945 decree that designated him as successor should the Führer become incapacitated. To any rational leader, it might have been a pragmatic suggestion, a last-ditch effort to salvage some semblance of German authority. To Hitler, it is the ultimate betrayal. He erupts in a fury that reverberates through the bunker. "Traitor! Disloyal swine!" he screams, his voice cracking as he pounds his fists on the map table. He orders Göring's immediate arrest, stripping him of all titles and dispatching SS troops to detain him. The once powerful Reichsmarschall, architect of the Luftwaffe's early successes, is reduced to a pariah. But beneath the rage, Hitler knows the deeper implication. Even his inner circle has abandoned faith in his leadership. Göring's move is not an isolated act of ambition. It mirrors the growing disillusionment among his closest allies. By mid-April, the situation is dire. Every major city in Germany, Hamburg, Cologne, Dresden, lies in ruins, reduced to rubble by Allied bombing campaigns. The Western Allies, led by General Dwight Eisenhower, advance from the west, while the Soviet juggernaut, under Marshal Georgy Zhukov, closes in from the east. The often invincible Wehrmacht is surrounded, its supply lines severed, its soldiers starving and demoralized. Desertions rise daily, with entire units surrendering en masse. Yet Hitler clings to illusions, his mind a fortress of denial. He pins his hopes on the so-called Steiner counterattack, a desperate plan led by General Felix Steiner to relieve Berlin by striking the Soviet flanks.
The plan is a fantasy from the outset. Steiner, commanding a patchwork force of exhausted troops and remnants of the Ninth Army, lacks the manpower and resources to mount any meaningful offensive. On April 22, Hitler demands an update, his voice rising with each unanswered question. When his staff informs him that Steiner has neither the troops nor the ability to launch the attack, the bunker witnesses its most infamous meltdown. Witnesses, secretaries like Traul Junge and generals like Heinz Guderian, describe a man unhinged, shaking uncontrollably, slamming his fists against the table and screaming that the war is lost and that everyone has betrayed him. "The army, the SS, my own staff, cowards, all of them," he rages, his voice breaking into a hoarse sob. This outburst marks the moment the illusion shatters. For the first time, Hitler utters the words his men never expected. The war is lost. He dismisses his staff, retreating to his private quarters. When they return, the transformation is stark. His voice is quieter, his face pale and drawn, almost ghostly. The fiery orator who once enthralled millions with promises of glory now speaks only of death. "I will stay in Berlin. When the time comes, I will shoot myself." The man who ruled Europe with an iron will now sits trembling in the shadows, staring at the floor, a broken shell of his former self. The siege tightens. Outside, the sounds of battle grow louder. The Red Army's T-34 tanks rumble through Berlin's streets, their tracks grinding over debris. Artillery shells explode with relentless precision, reducing historic landmarks, the Brandenburg Gate, the Reichstag, to smoldering husks. The city is a sea of fire, its skyline obscured by black smoke. Civilians flee through the rubble, clutching meager possessions, while SS officers burn documents in frantic attempts to erase evidence of Nazi crimes. Young soldiers, some barely 16, are sent to defend streets that no longer exist, their rifles trembling in untrained hands. Inside the bunker, conditions deteriorate. Food supplies dwindle to scraps, stale bread, canned meat, and the occasional potato. Water pressure fails, forcing the inhabitants to rely on rainwater collected from the courtyard. Electricity flickers, with some sections plunged into darkness. Secretaries like Gerda Christian and Traul Junge yoop quietly at night, their nerves frayed by the constant bombardment. Some, including Hitler's dietitian Constanza Manziarli, contemplate cyanide capsules rather than face Soviet capture. The bunker, once a symbol of Hitler's unassailable power, has become a tomb. Even Hitler's personal life reflects his descent. His beloved German shepherd Blondie becomes a pawn in his delusions. On April 29th, he orders Dr. Werner Haas to test a cyanide capsule on the dog to ensure its efficacy. Blondie dies in agony, her whimpers echoing through the bunker, a grim rehearsal for the Führer's own end. This act reveals the depth of his paranoia, a leader so consumed by fear that he trusts poison more than the loyalty of his staff. Witnesses, including Rokas Misch, the bunker's telephone operator, later recount the scene with horror, noting Hitler's detached observation of the dog's death. The psychological toll is palpable. Hitler's once commanding presence has eroded, replaced by a gaunt figure who shuffles through the bunker's corridors, his uniform hanging loosely on his emaciated frame. His hands tremble uncontrollably, a symptom of Parkinson's disease exacerbated by stress and amphetamine use. He rants less frequently, his speech is reduced to muttered monologues about betrayal and destiny. The man who once inspired millions now inspires only pity and dread among his dwindling entourage.
The final betrayals. By late April, Hitler's closest allies begin to fracture. Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsführer SS and architect of the Holocaust, secretly negotiates with Count Folke Bernadotte of Sweden, offering to surrender to the Western Allies in exchange for immunity. When Hitler learns of this on April 28 via a BBC broadcast, he is incandescent with rage. "Himmler, my most loyal Heinrich, a traitor," he shouts, ordering his arrest. The SS, once his most devoted enforcer, is now tainted by disloyalty. Martin Bormann, Hitler's secretary, fuels the fury, urging swift punishment, but Himmler escapes to Flensburg, evading capture until May. Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister and Hitler's staunchest defender, begins to unravel emotionally. Once a master of spinning defeat into victory, He now spends hours in the bunker's map room, staring at the advancing red lines with vacant eyes. His wife Magda prepares to kill their 6 children with cyanide, a chilling testament to their shared fanaticism. Other generals, like Guderian and Keitel, are either dead, captured, or fleeing westward, abandoning the Führer to his fate. The final blow comes on April 29, with news that Benito Mussolini, Hitler's closest ally and mirror in Italy, has been captured by Italian partisans. Executed on April 28 near Lake Como, Mussolini's body is hung upside down in Milan's Piazzale Loreto, a public spectacle of humiliation. Hitler stares at the report for a long time, his face a mask of silent dread. "I will not suffer Mussolini's fate," he mutters, his voice barely audible. This moment crystallizes his resolve. If he cannot win the war, he will control its end. Death becomes his last act of defiance. That night, in a bizarre ritual, Hitler marries Eva Braun, his longtime companion, in a brief ceremony conducted by Walter Wagner, a minor official. It is not a wedding born of love, but a final illusion of normalcy, a desperate grasp at domesticity amid collapse. They toast with cheap champagne, the clink of glasses drowned by the rumble of Soviet artillery. Witnesses describe Hitler as strangely calm, polite, almost gentle, a stark departure from his usual tirades. Eva, dressed in a simple black dress, smiles faintly, her resignation mirroring his. Outside, the Red Army storms the government district, gunfire echoing above. The end in the bunker. On April 30, 1945, the end arrives. At approximately 3:30 p.m., Hitler and Eva retired to their private quarters. His aides, including Otto Gunsche and Heinz Linge, are ordered to wait outside. A single gunshot pierces the silence moments later. When the door is opened, they find Hitler slumped on a sofa, a Walther PPK 7.65mm pistol still in his right hand, a small entry wound above his temple. Eva lies beside him, her body limp, the faint almond scent of cyanide lingering in the air. The man who demanded millions die for his vision could not face defeat himself. Following Hitler's instructions, Gunsche and Linge carry the bodies to the Chancellery Garden. Amid falling Soviet shells, they douse them with gasoline and set them ablaze. The fire crackles under a gray Berlin sky, a pyre for the Führer and his bride. Soviet troops, advancing through the ruins, are minutes away, their T-34s rumbling closer. The empire that once spanned a continent ends in a few feet of ash, its 1,000-year promise reduced to a smoldering heap. When Soviet forces enter the bunker on May 2nd, they find a scene frozen in decay. Maps lie scattered, half-eaten meals rot on tables, and desperate notes scribble the walls, pleas for mercy, curses against traitors, and final farewells. The air is heavy with smoke, sweat, and fear, as if history itself lingers in the stillness. Hitler's guards, including Misch, surrender, their resistance futile. Berlin falls completely on May 2nd, and within a week, Nazi Germany collapses, its 12-year reign extinguished. The aftermath and lingering myths. In the months following, rumors swirled that Hitler escaped, perhaps to Argentina or Antarctica, fueled by unverified sightings and the chaos of war's end. For many Germans, clinging to the fantasy of his survival is easier than facing the truth. Their Führer abandoned them, just as he abandoned reality years earlier. The real moment Hitler lost the war was not in the bunker. It was not when the Allies crossed the Rhine or the Soviets took Berlin. It was the moment he believed himself infallible, that destiny could not betray him. The bunker was merely where that illusion died. The human cost is staggering. Millions of lives, soldiers, civilians, Jews and others, lie shattered across Europe. Cities like Warsaw, Stalingrad, and Berlin are erased, their populations scarred for generations. Families are broken, cultures obliterated, all for the delusion of a man who thought himself greater than truth. History does not remember Hitler for his empire or speeches, but for the silence that followed. The silence of a city in ruins, a bunker underground, and a dictator who finally realized his hate-built world could not outlive him. The Third Reich did not end with a grand battle or heroic stand. It ended with a single gunshot, a quiet echo in the darkness, marking the fall of a man who believed he could rewrite fate. As Berlin burned, the world exhaled, the nightmare finally over. Yet the scars remain, a testament to the fragility of power built on lies and the enduring strength of those who opposed it.
The psychological descent. Hitler's mental decline in the bunker is a study in paranoia and isolation. His reliance on amphetamines, prescribed by Dr. Theodor Morell, intensifies his mood swings, turning bouts of rage into periods of catatonic withdrawal. He spends hours staring at a portrait of Frederick the Great, seeking inspiration from the Prussian king who turned defeat into victory at Lützen in 1757. But no miracle arrives. His once sharp memory falters, his strategic acumen replaced by disjointed rants about Jewish conspiracies and Bolshevik hordes. His physical deterioration mirrors his psychological collapse. Once a charismatic figure with a commanding presence, he now shuffles with a stoop, his left arm trembling from Parkinson's. His diet, limited to mashed potatoes and vegetable soup due to dental issues, leaves him gaunt. The dampness of the bunker aggravates his health, yet he refuses medical evacuation, insisting on sharing his staff's fate. This masochistic resolve is less about courage than a desire to control the narrative of his end. The global context. As Hitler's world collapses, the Allied powers close in. Operation Barbarossa's failure in 1941 marked the turning point, but 1944's D-Day and the Soviet Bagration offensive sealed Germany's fate. By April 1945, the Allied Western Allies hold the Rhine, while the Soviets encircle Berlin. The Yalta Conference in February divides Europe, with Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin agreeing on Germany's partition. Hitler's refusal to negotiate, even as his generals propose surrender terms, isolates him further. The Red Army's advance is a juggernaut. Zhukov's First Belarusian Front, supported by 2.5 million troops and 6,250 tanks, overwhelms German defenses. The Luftwaffe, reduced to 300 operational aircraft, offers no resistance. Hitler's orders to fight to the last man drain Germany's youth, with the Volkssturm, elderly and teenage conscripts, sacrificed in futile stands. The bunker's inhabitants. The bunker houses a microcosm of Nazi hierarchy. Goebbels and his family embody fanaticism, while Bormann schemes to maintain influence. Eva Braun, often dismissed as a frivolous companion, shows surprising resilience, staying by Hitler's side. Secretaries like Junge and Christian provide a human face to the tragedy, their diaries later revealing the bunker's surreal atmosphere: laughter amid despair, dances in candlelight, and whispered prayers. Foreign observers like the Swedish journalist Nils von Hofsten note the bunker's contrast to Hitler's earlier grandeur. His Berghof retreat, with its panoramic views, is a distant memory. The bunker's 18 rooms, including a conference room and Hitler's suite, are cramped and utilitarian, their walls stained by moisture and cigarette burns. The final hours. On April 30th, the bunker's routine unravels. Hitler dictates his last will and testament, blaming international Jewry for the war and appointing Admiral Karl Dönitz as his successor. The document, typed by Junge, is a final act of denial, ignoring the Reich's collapse. At 3 p.m., he hosts a farewell lunch, offering tea and cake to his staff, his demeanor eerily calm. The suicide pact with Eva is premeditated. She takes cyanide, while Hitler shoots himself, a dual method to ensure death. The burning of their bodies, overseen by Gunsche, fulfills his wish to avoid desecration. Soviet troops entering on May 1st find the charred remains, later identified by dental records. Legacy and reflection. The bunker's fall marks the end of Nazi Germany, but not its ideology.
Neo-Nazi groups later exploit escape rumors, though declassified Soviet files confirm Hitler's death. The Cold War's division of Berlin, symbolized by the wall, echoes the bunker's isolation. Historians debate Hitler's final sanity, with some arguing his end was a logical conclusion to his megalomania. The Third Reich's 12 years left a legacy of destruction. 6 million Jews, 5 million Soviet civilians, and millions more perished. Berlin's reconstruction, starting in the 1950s, buries the bunker under a parking lot, a quiet erasure of its horrors. But the silence of that underground tomb remains a haunting reminder of a dictator's delusion and the world's resilience against it.